Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening Voice Summit audience. My name is Emerson Sklar, and I'm the Chief Evangelist of Bespoken.
And my name is Valdivia, and I'm the Product Manager at Bespoken.
And we're here to talk to you about perhaps the most overlooked component of voice app quality today. But before we get into that, let's set the virtual stage. We only have about 14 and a half minutes left, but our expectation is that after this session, you'll walk away knowing concretely how to tackle the biggest detractor from happy voice customers today. For those of you that don't know Bespoken, we're the leaders in automated testing, tuning, training, and monitoring for conversational AI. We work with many of the biggest and brightest brands in the space, and in the last 2 years alone, our users have conducted over 120,000 hours of voice app testing, all without ever having to actually open their mouths and talk to a physical device. So we have a wealth of experience with a really diverse range of conversational products, and we've seen some really incredible successes. But beyond our anecdotes, how's the market as a whole looking? Well, if you ask the enterprises themselves, you'll see that things seem to be pretty great. Employee satisfaction, ESAT, with the outcome of voice projects increased by 5% last year, and uncertainty about project outcome, that gray portion of these graphs, similarly dropped significantly. And that reflects companies becoming more comfortable with voice and more clearly defining objectives at the beginning of their voice development lifecycle. But if you look at the consumer side of the equation, you'll see a very different perspective. Despite people spending more time at home now in front of voice-enabled devices, usage is actually stagnant or even decreasing except for certain specific use cases like streaming media. Hardware sales, which have historically been the strongest revenue driver in voice, is slowing compared to the last several years. And thanks to a combination of poor prior experiences with third-party voice apps and a lack of clear understanding for most users as to where the first-party ends and the third-party begins, most users in fact report not even using third-party apps at all. And so why is that? Well, the number one characteristic that impacts users' perception of the quality of voice apps is how well it understands them. And that fact has not changed in several years. However, if you look at the priorities of the enterprises that are actually creating these apps, you'll see that their biggest concern by a huge margin is discoverability. And that represents really the first big miss for many companies, not focusing on that actual user experience. That said, discovery is obviously very, very important. But if you look at how users actually discover new voice apps, the biggest ways are through word of mouth, either from friends or social media. And so if you want to capitalize on that kind of promotion, you need to make sure you're providing users a compelling, frustration-free, and high-quality experience. But quality itself is very complex. People understand quality for the web and mobile world pretty well, but that's simply not the case in voice. Wyatt Earp said of the OK Corral that fast is fine, but accuracy is everything. But perhaps a more modern quote from Larry Sanger, the founder of Wikipedia, would be relevant. It's that quality is determined by accuracy and completeness. And so don't just take our word for it. If you look through the app stores and through social media, you'll find countless threads of people sharing their frustration with voice platforms due to a lack of understanding. And that problem is endemic across the entire space. It's present with first-party content, those features that are core components of the platforms themselves. It's present with third-party content, even in use cases that are still extremely popular today, things like games, recipes, shopping lists. And many brands, we find, are in a sort of limbo between first and third-party experiences, and perhaps unsurprisingly, it's common there as well. And so all of this really speaks to a missed opportunity to delight users by providing an extremely usable solution. Where the challenge comes is that usability in the voice space is closely tied with accuracy, specifically speech recognition accuracy, how well the platform understands your users when they naturally interact with it. Unlike in mobile, where everyone's thumbs are the same and their experiences of a mobile app are going to be very similar, everyone's voices are different, and so that results in voice apps that understand a user's utterance on average between 75 and 80% of the time. And you might say, oh, that's not too bad. But that's just for one utterance. If you have two utterances, the chance of being understood both those times drops down to 64%. If it's three utterances, it drops down to just over 50%. Think about a trivia game where you have to answer 12 questions. In that case, the chance that a user is going to be properly understood all 12 times is a mere 7%. So what can you do? Well, we see three pretty common scenarios. You could try to force your voice platform of choice to go and improve their models, but I can say from experience that that's a bit of a Sisyphean task. You could take an open source NLP platform, record thousands of hours of audio, and try to build your own language model, But frankly, that process is harder than learning ancient Greek for most enterprises. Or you could say, well, there's nothing I can do, but my users are going to know that it's not my app's problem, it's the voice platform's problem. But unfortunately, customers don't compartmentalize quality. They're not going to know why things don't work. They're just going to know that they don't work.
Well, luckily Emerson, there is another way, usability performance testing. Usability performance testing is the best way to quantifiably tune your conversational model for optimum speech recognition accuracy, regardless of your use case, supported voice platform, or the native and non-native accents and colloquialisms of your real users. And you can think of usability performance testing as a prescriptive, iterative process to achieving conversational delight, where you measure your current performance, analyze the results, and look for trends and insight, enhance your model with those findings, and then measure your new performance to make sure you're always tracking towards success. Let's think of an example. Trivia apps are extremely popular today, and are also one of the use cases most impacted by subtle changes to these conversational models. So let's say we have a skill that gives fun trivia questions about some of the world's most famous scientists. And this skill is a simple one. It only has one intent, which is the answer, 4 different scientists currently, and has some sample utterances. Now, with a skill like this, you might say, oh, we don't need to do any tuning. It's such a simple use case and has such narrow scope and limited slot values that I'm sure it will perform well. But you never really know for sure unless you actually do some testing. So where do we start? To begin, you want to measure your current performance. We'll see why that's so critical in a few minutes, but figuring out exactly how well or poorly it's doing today is a fundamental first step. And there are a few things you have to do for that. First, you have to identify the critical parts of the interaction model. If you're making an IVR to report power outages, for example, that might be testing the addresses themselves. If you're streaming TV shows, you want to make sure that all the items in your product catalog work. In this case, there's only one custom intent, so it's pretty obvious which one we want to focus on. But for your particular voice app, you'll want to think long and hard about what is most impactful for your users. Next, you want to identify natural variations on phrasing. This should include the sample utterances you have, as well as some other that you don't explicitly have there today. And finally, you want to determine the actual voices and acoustics. This needs to be representative of your real target user base. And by using text-to-speech engines to generate these utterances, you save yourself tremendous expense and also tremendous effort versus trying to get manually recorded utterances. Once you have all that ready, you want to send it to the voice platform and capture the output from that platform's NLP system. That's an important distinction to testing you may be doing today. You're not looking for, did my system function properly? You're looking for, what did my system understand that I said? The next step is to analyze the results. So here are some variations on phrasing and voices that we use for answering who came up with E equals mc squared. Let's see how it performed. This first one, Albert Einstein, with a US English male voice, worked great. No big surprise there. But the second one, where it's the same utterance, with a US English female voice, failed. In this case, the NLP heard Albert Einstein instead of Albert Einstein. That's a common type of issue that we see. The linguistic reason behind it might be impossible to ever fully understand, but it's fortunately an easy thing to fix. Just add in Albert as a synonym. Same with the third one. We only included his full name in the slot values, so when we passed in just his last name, it failed. Again, an easy fix. Just add that as a synonym. What about the fourth one? In this case, that's an utterance that is different enough to not match up based on the samples we included when creating the intent. And again, it's an easy fix. Just add that as an additional sample. Finally, what happens when we use a non-US English voice? Predictably, the NLP returns back some pretty wonky results. But just as with the other issues we saw, we don't need to know exactly why it did that. Just need to know how to fix it. Now, once you've made those changes, you might say, okay, everything's done. It must work better now, right? Well, not necessarily. These aren't totally deterministic systems. And so, when you introduce human changes to AI-driven platforms, you get results that often don't totally make sense. And so, you see that you can make big leaps forward, but perhaps some changes you introduce actually have unintended negative consequences. We've seen this time and time again, and we're working on some interesting ways to even further streamline the process. But the nice thing about doing this via automation and using text-to-speech versus trying to do it manually is you can do this in parallel, at broad scale, and extremely rapidly. And so, in this particular example, it took us 5 rounds, the initial baseline and 4 follow-up rounds. And we were able to take that failure rate from 25% down to 3%. That's an almost 90% reduction in those most frustrating of errors that users face every day. And I mentioned that we've done this for tons of different types of voice apps. It doesn't matter if you're making games for a smart speaker, modernizing your call center with something like Amazon Connect, or building a new voice-powered set-top box. If you want to be the very best, the only surefire way to do it is via automated usability performance testing.
You're spot on, Diego, and that's really what separates the winning brands in the space from the ones with low reviews and limited engagement. And so we're short on time now, but we wanted to leave you with 2 things. First, a recap of that UPT process. Step 1, measure your current speech recognition accuracy. Step 2, analyze the results, identify any trends, and find what the fixes could be. Step 3, enhance your conversational model to drive up that accuracy. And step 4, rinse and repeat to ensure that you're always tracking towards success. The last thing I wanted to mention is actually something special that we're doing for attendees of this year's Voice Summit. We're going to be giving away a free baseline usability performance testing measurement to the first 10 companies to send an email to contact@bespoken.io. Be sure to include your contact info, a 1 or 2 line description about what it is that you're working on, and a link to the product if it happens to be something that's live and publicly available today. And whether you leverage us or you find another solution to this challenge, we're confident that you'll be amazed at how easy it is to make a huge impact on your users, and we're excited to help each and every voice app become a 5-star one.